everyone. I'd like to continue the previous story. I hope you'll keep enjoying it. In the meantime, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Ethna studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "The white wolf," she said. "Yes, perhaps that is your path after all. We will help you." The dryads fed Ciri, let her rest, treated her wounds and blisters. They gave her proper traveling clothes, more practical than her tattered princess gown. They gave her a small knife and taught her how to use it. And when she was ready, they led her to the southern edge of Broccolon and set her on the road. Ciri traveled for another week, moving through villages and towns, always asking for news of the White Wolf, of Geralt of Rivia. Most people had heard of him. Witches were famous or infamous depending on who you asked, but no one seemed to know where he was. She was in a small village called Bearfield when fortune finally smiled on her. An old merchant told her that a witcher matching that description had passed through just 3 days prior, heading toward Sodden Hill, where a great battle was about to take place between the northern kingdoms and Nilfgaard. Ciri turned toward Sodden. She walked for 2 more days, her feet bleeding in her borrowed boots, her stomach empty, but her determination unwavering. He was exactly as she had imagined from the stories, tall and lean, with white hair and amber eyes, 2 swords on his back, a wolf medallion on his chest. He was riding a horse traveling alone, and when he saw her standing in the road, he pulled his mount to a stop. "My grandmother said I should find you," Ciri said, and suddenly all the fear and grief and exhaustion crashed over her at once. "She said you would protect me. She said you were my destiny. I don't know what that means," Ciri admitted. "But grandmother said you were bound to me by destiny. She said to find the White Wolf. So I found you." Geralt dismounted from his horse. He walked over to Ciri and knelt down so that he was at her eye level. He studied her face, seeing the exhaustion, the fear, the desperate courage of a child who had survived the unsurvivable. "Come on, then," he said, not unkindly. "You look half-starved. Let's get you some food and a safe place to sleep. We have much to discuss, you and I." He helped her up onto his horse and they rode together toward the nearest town. Ciri, exhausted beyond measure, leaned against his back and finally let herself feel safe. She did not know then what that would mean. She did not know about the elder blood sleeping in her veins, or the prophecy that spoke of her future, or the powers that would soon awaken. She did not know about the wild hunt, or the lodge, or any of the forces that would try to claim her. She was just a 12-year-old girl who had lost her home, who had watched her world burn, who had survived through determination and the memory of her grandmother's final command. But she had survived, and in surviving, she had taken the first step on a path that would lead her to places she could never imagine, to other worlds, to other times, to powers that would shake the foundations of reality itself. The fire burns low here in our library, my dear friends. The tale of Ciri's childhood ends in tragedy and loss, but also in hope. She found Geralt. She found the destiny that her grandmother promised her. Tomorrow night, I will tell you of what came next, of Ciri's training at Kaer Morhen with the witches, of the first awakening of her powers, and of the arrival of a sorceress who would become like a mother to her. But for now, rest. The story is far from over, but this chapter is complete. Sleep well, and know that even in the darkest times, even when kingdoms fall and homes burn, the human spirit can endure. Until tomorrow evening, my young scholars, may your dreams be peaceful and your studies fruitful. Good evening once more, my dear friends. I see the anticipation in your eyes as you gather around the fire tonight. You want to know what became of young Ciri after she found Geralt. How did a princess become something more? How did the elder blood awaken? Pour yourselves some wine, make yourselves comfortable, and let me tell you of transformation and discovery. Geralt took Ciri to Kaer Morhen. This name may mean nothing to you, but to witches it is everything. It is home, sanctuary, the last remnant of their order's former glory. Kaer Morhen is a fortress, ancient and crumbling, built high in the mountains where winter comes early and stays late. Once it housed hundreds of witches and their students. Once it was a thriving school where boys were transformed into monster hunters through brutal training and terrible mutations. But those days are long gone. The fortress had been attacked decades ago by fearful villagers and zealous priests who saw witches as abominations. Most of the witches were killed. The secrets of creating new witches were lost. Now Kaer Morhen was home to only a handful of survivors, old men mostly, veterans who had nowhere else to go. They maintained the fortress as best they could, hunting in the surrounding forests, living quiet lives of routine and memory. Geralt bringing a young girl to this place was unprecedented. Witches did not take in children anymore, not since the massacre. And they certainly did not take in girls. The mutations that created witches, painful and dangerous even for boys, would be fatal to a female child. Everyone knew this. But Ciri was not there to become a witcher. She was there because she needed protection, training, and guidance that only these men could provide. And because Geralt was bound to her by the law of surprise, by destiny itself. The other witches were skeptical at first. Vesemir, the oldest of them, grizzled and scarred, looked at Ciri with doubt written clearly on his weathered face. "Train her," Geralt replied simply. "She is my child of surprise. She is being hunted by forces we do not yet understand. She needs to learn to survive." Vesemir looked at Ciri, this small, thin girl with ash-colored hair and enormous eyes. She stared back at him without flinching, her chin raised in a way that reminded him of her grandmother, the lioness. Well, Vesemir said after a moment. "She has spirit, at least. That is a start." Very well, girl. If you are to train with witches, you will be treated as a witcher in training. No special treatment, no mercy. Can you accept that? The first months were brutal. Ciri had been raised as a princess, taught courtly manners and statecraft. She knew how to ride and had some basic fencing instruction, but nothing that had prepared her for what the witches demanded. She woke before dawn every day. She ran up and down the mountain paths until her legs trembled and her lungs burned. She learned to climb walls, to balance on narrow beams, to fall without injury. Her hands grew calloused from gripping sword hilts and climbing ropes. Her muscles, soft from palace life, became hard and lean. Vesemir was a merciless teacher. He would attack her without warning, testing her reflexes. He made her practice the same sword forms hundreds of times until they became instinct. When she made mistakes, he would snap his wooden practice sword across her knuckles or the backs of her legs, leaving bruises that she wore like medals. But Ciri never complained. She bit her lip until it bled rather than cry out. She picked herself up from the dirt and snow again and again. She was determined to prove herself, to show these men that she belonged here, that she could keep up with them despite being younger, smaller and female. And slowly, something remarkable began to happen. Ciri was learning faster than any normal child should. Her reflexes were becoming sharper, quicker than human reflexes should be. Her stamina, which should have been limited by her youth and size, seemed bottomless. She could train for hours without tiring. The witches noticed, of course. They exchanged glances over her head, silently acknowledging that this child was not entirely normal. But they said nothing to her, not yet. They simply pushed her harder, demanded more, curious to see what she was capable of. Geralt spent the most time with her. He taught her to track, to read signs in the forest, to identify monster spore and understand behavior patterns. He taught her herbalism, how to brew simple potions, which plants could heal and which would kill. He taught her the witch's code, such as it was, and the philosophy of their profession. But more than that, he simply spent time with her. He listened when she talked about her grandmother, about Sintra, about the nightmares that still woke her in the dark hours before dawn. He did not offer empty comfort or false promises. He simply listened, and sometimes that was enough. Ciri began to trust him, began to see him as more than just a witcher bound to her by ancient law, began to see him as something like a father, though neither of them spoke that word aloud. The other witches also took an interest in her training. Lambert, the youngest and most bitter of them, taught her dirty fighting, tricks that no honorable knight would use, but that might save her life in a real fight. Eskel, quiet and scarred, taught her patience and observation, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Winter came to Kaer Morhen, as it always did, harsh and isolating. The mountain passes filled with snow, cutting them off from the rest of the world. It would be months before the thaw came, months trapped in the fortress with only each other for company. It started with dreams, vivid, intense dreams that felt more real than reality. Ciri would dream of places she had never been, people she had never met. She dreamed of forests made of glass, of cities floating in the sky, of deserts where the sand sang. She dreamed in languages she did not speak, but somehow understood. She told Geralt about the dreams one morning after a particularly intense night. He listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail she provided. "These are not normal dreams," he said finally. "I need to send word to someone who might understand what is happening to you, but the passes are snowed in. We will have to wait for spring." But the dreams were just the beginning. One afternoon, during the sword practice with Vesemir, something strange happened. The old witcher had disarmed her, sending her practice sword flying across the courtyard. It should have clattered to the ground, but instead it stopped in midair, hovering for just a moment before falling. The witches gathered around her, examining her with their enhanced senses. They could detect something now, some energy radiating from her that they had not noticed before. Or perhaps it had not been there before and was only now beginning to emerge. That night, Ciri woke screaming. The sound was unlike any scream a child should be able to produce. It resonated with power, with something fundamental and terrifying. The stone walls of her chamber cracked, the wooden door splintered, the window shattered outward. The witches came running, swords drawn, thinking they were under attack. But they found only Ciri, standing in the middle of her destroyed room, tears streaming down her face, terrified by what she had done. Geralt wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to the main hall where the great fireplace provided light and warmth. The other witches gathered around, their faces grim. "Not cursed," Geralt said, settling her into a chair near the fire. "But you do carry something in your blood, something ancient and powerful. It is time we explained." And so they told her about Lara Dorren, about the prophecy, about the power that could open doorways between worlds. They told her about Pavetta's display at the betrothal feast, about the forces that would seek to capture her and use her. The rest of that winter passed in a strange mixture of normal training and abnormal occurrences. Ciri continued her physical conditioning, her sword work, her studies of monsters and herbs. But now there were also the incidents. Objects would move when she became emotional. Once, during an argument with Lambert about some trivial matter, all the cups on the dining table flew across the room and shattered against the wall. Another time, when she was concentrating very hard during a meditation exercise Vesemir taught her, she seemed to flicker, becoming translucent for just a moment, as if she was only partially present in this reality. The dreams intensified. She began to see things that had not happened yet, or perhaps that were happening in other worlds. She saw a woman with violet eyes and black hair working magic with casual power. She saw spectral riders in the sky hunting through storm clouds. She saw herself, older, running through places that defied description. Spring finally came, melting the snow and opening the mountain passes. Geralt left Kaer Morhen riding down into the lowlands. He was gone for 2 weeks. When he returned, he was not alone. The woman who rode beside him was beautiful in a way that was almost frightening. She had raven black hair, pale skin, and eyes the color of violets. She wore rich clothing, clearly expensive, and she radiated power and confidence. This was Yennefer of Vengerberg, one of the most powerful sorceresses in the northern kingdoms. Ciri watched from the courtyard as they rode in. She felt an instinctive response to this woman, something that went beyond normal human perception. The elder blood recognized magic, recognized power, recognized someone who might understand. Yennefer dismounted and walked towards Ciri with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. She stopped a few paces away and studied the girl with those unsettling violet eyes. Yennefer's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "We shall remedy that. You and I are going to spend a great deal of time together, child. I am here to teach you magic." Yennefer's expression softened slightly. "I will teach you what I can. But Ciri, you must understand something. What you carry, the elder blood, it is something I have only read about in the oldest texts. I cannot promise I will have all the answers. We may be learning together." And so began the next phase of Ciri's education. Yennefer moved into Kaer Morhen, taking over one of the better preserved towers as her workspace. She brought with her books, scrolls, and strange instruments for detecting and measuring magical energy. The first thing she did was test Ciri, not with spells or exercises, but simply observing her, measuring the energy that radiated from the girl. She spent 3 days doing nothing but watching Ciri go about her daily routine, taking notes, muttering to herself. "I have good news and bad news," Yennefer said, settling into a chair with a cup of wine. "The good news is that you are, without question, the most naturally powerful being I have ever encountered. The energy inside you is staggering. The bad news is that you cannot use magic the way other mages do. I cannot teach you to cast spells in the traditional sense. Your power is too wild, too primal. It works on different principles than normal magic." "I did not say that," Yennefer said sharply. "I said I cannot teach you normal magic. But what you have, the elder blood, it has its own rules, its own methods. We will discover them together. Now, sit down and let us begin." The training that followed was frustrating for both teacher and student. Yennefer would try to teach Ciri a simple spell, something any apprentice could learn, and Ciri could not do it. The power would not respond to normal magical formulas or gestures. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But when Ciri was not trying, when she simply reacted to emotion or need, the power would manifest. Once, when she missed her grandmother terribly, thinking about Calanthe's death, tears streaming down her face, the air around her filled with images, ghostly figures, memories made visible, showing scenes from Sintra before the fall. Yennefer watched in amazement, taking notes frantically. So they changed their approach. Instead of trying to teach Ciri to cast spells, Yennefer taught her meditation, emotional control, awareness of her own mental state. She taught Ciri to recognize when the power was rising, when it was about to manifest, and how to gently redirect it or allow it to dissipate safely. It was slow progress, but it was progress. The random incidents became less frequent. Ciri began to develop a sense of the power inside her, like learning to recognize a new sense or a new limb. She could feel it now, sleeping beneath her skin, ready to respond when called or when her emotions ran too high. Yennefer also began to care for Ciri, though she would have denied it if asked. The sorceress, who had always been focused on her own power and advancement, found herself genuinely concerned for this child. She made sure Ciri ate properly. She brushed and braided the girl's hair. She sat with her when the nightmares came, offering comfort in her own austere way. And Ciri, who had lost her mother and grandmother, began to see Yennefer as something like a mother figure. It was a strange family they formed, the Witcher, the sorceress, and the child with elder blood. But it was a family nonetheless. As summer came to Kaer Morhen, Ciri was stronger, faster, and more skilled with a sword than most adult warriors. She had learned to sense her power and exert some basic control over it. She had learned about her heritage, her destiny, and the forces that sought her, but she had also learned something more important. She had learned that she was not alone. She had Geralt, Yennefer, and the other witches. She had people who cared about her, who would protect her, who would help her face whatever came next. And something was coming. They all felt it. The dreams were becoming more urgent. Ciri spoke of riders in the sky more and more often, of worlds dying, of cold spreading across reality like a disease, of something called the White Frost that consumed everything it touched. But that part of our tale must wait for tomorrow, my dear friends. The hour grows late, and I see exhaustion in your eyes from absorbing so much information. We have covered much tonight. Ciri's training, the awakening of her power, the arrival of Yennefer. The pieces are falling into place. Tomorrow, I will tell you about the Wild Hunt itself, about who and what they truly are, and about the first time Ciri encountered them face to face. It is a frightening tale, full of danger and despair. But for now, rest. Dream of mountain fortresses and sword training. Dream of power awakening, of destinies unfolding, of families formed not by blood, but by choice and circumstance. Until tomorrow evening, my young scholars, sleep well and deeply. Welcome back, my dear friends, for another evening of tales and revelations. The fire is bright tonight, and I have closed the shutters against the wind, creating a cozy shelter here in our library. Tonight's chapter is darker than those that came before, for we speak now of the Wild Hunt, and that is not a subject to be taken lightly. Settle in close, and let me tell you of the riders who hunt between worlds. In the folklore of common people, the Wild Hunt is a ghost story. They say it is a procession of spectral riders who appear in the sky during storms, harbingers of war and disaster. Farmers and peasants cross themselves and hide indoors when the hunt rides by, for the stories say that to see the hunt is to court death. Some say the hunt collects the souls of the wicked. Others say it hunts the innocent for sport. There are 100 different stories, 100 different fears. The wild hunt is real, but they are not ghosts, and they are not collecting souls. They are elves, but not from our world. They are the NL, and they come from a dimension that collided with ours during the conjunction of the spheres, just as the N-Sider elves who now live in our world came from somewhere else. But where the N-Sider settled in our reality and made it their home, the NL never fully committed to staying. They kept one foot in their home world and one foot in ours, moving between the two, exploring, conquering, taking what they wanted from various dimensions and bringing it back to their own. The NLA are different from the elves you might have met in our world. They are taller, more ethereal, more alien in their beauty. They live in a world called Tirnalia, which in their language means something like land of the young or eternal realm. For centuries, their world was paradise. Green meadows that stretched forever, forests of silver trees, cities of crystal that sang in the wind. The NL were masters of magic beyond what most human or even N-Sider mages could comprehend. They could open portals at will, step between realities, move through time. It happened slowly at first, so slowly that they did not notice or did not care. The winters grew longer, the summers grew shorter and cooler. The great forests began to thin. Animals that had lived in Tirnalia for eons began to disappear, unable to find enough food to survive. The NL, in their arrogance, thought they could stop it. They were masters of magic after all. Surely they could turn back this creeping cold, this slow death of their paradise. They tried spell after spell, ritual after ritual. They poured enormous amounts of magical energy into warming their world, into bringing back the sun, into reviving the dying land. But nothing worked. The cold kept coming, and eventually the NL were forced to confront a terrible truth. What was killing their world was not something they could fight with magic. It was something far bigger, far older, far more powerful than anything they had encountered before. The white frost is difficult to explain to someone who has never studied the deeper mysteries of the multiverse. Imagine, if you will, that all of reality, all the countless worlds and dimensions that exist, are like islands in a vast ocean. The white frost is like a tide of ice that moves through that ocean, consuming one island after another. It is not natural cold, not winter as we understand it. It is something more fundamental, more absolute. It's the heat death of reality itself, the slow grinding down of all energy, all life, all possibility into nothing but frozen stillness. It moves from world to world, dimension to dimension, leaving behind only ice and silence. And there is no stopping it. Once the white frost reaches a world, that world will die. It might take centuries, even millennia, but death is certain. Everything will freeze. Everything will end. The NLO realized that their world was being consumed by the white frost. They had perhaps a few centuries left before Tirnalia became uninhabitable, perhaps 1,000 years before it froze completely. For beings who measured their lives in millennia, 1,000 years was not very long at all. They needed to escape. They needed to find a new world, a new home, somewhere the White Frost had not yet reached. And they knew from their explorations that there were such worlds. Our world, for instance, was still young and vital, untouched by the frost. But there was a problem. The NL could open portals, yes. They could visit other worlds, but they could not transport their entire civilization through those portals. The magic required to move millions of NL, to transplant cities and forests and all the infrastructure of their society that was beyond even their considerable power. You see, the NL knew about Lara Dorren. They knew about the power that flowed through her bloodline, the ability to open gates not just temporarily, but permanently, to create staple passages between worlds through which entire populations could travel. This was the key to their survival. For centuries, they tracked Lara's descendants. They would occasionally cross into our world, usually appearing as spectral figures, because they could not fully materialize without great effort. They would search for anyone carrying the blood, and when they found them, they would try to capture them, to bring them back to Tir Nalia. But most carriers were too weak. The blood was diluted, dormant. They could not do what the NL needed. The elves would use these weak carriers for breeding, trying to strengthen the bloodline, but it was slow work spanning generations. The leader of these expeditions was a figure named Eredin. He was the commander of the Red Riders, the elite cavalry of the NL. In our world, when people reported seeing the Wild Hunt, they were usually seeing Eredin and his riders appearing as ghostly figures in the sky, searching for carriers of elder blood. Eredin was tall, even for an NL, and he wore armor that seemed to be made of ice and shadow. His face was beautiful in that cold, perfect way that the NL had, but his eyes held no mercy, no compassion. He had lived for over 600 years, and he had spent much of that time hunting, always hunting, for the one carrier strong enough to save his world. Behind Eredin stood Oberon Mercetak, the king of the NL. Oberon was ancient, one of the oldest of his kind, and he had grown weary and bitter watching his world die. He had tried for centuries to father a child with elder blood, to breed it into his own royal line, but he was old, and his vitality was failing. The children he managed to sire showed little or no power. Oberon had an advisor, a sage named Avalok. He was different from the other NL, more thoughtful, less cruel. Avalok had spent his long life studying the elder blood, researching Lara Dorren and her descendants. He knew more about the blood and its properties than perhaps anyone living, and he had his own ideas about what should be done, ideas that did not always align with Oberon's or Eredin's plans. The hunt had been watching Ciri since her birth. They knew who she was, knew the potential she carried. They had sent their riders to observe, to wait for the right moment to claim her. When Sintra fell, when Ciri fled into the wilderness, the hunt saw their opportunity. Eredin led the riders personally on that mission. They appeared during storms, using the chaos of the weather to mask their presence. They hunted Ciri through the countryside, always just behind her, always closing in. But they had competition. Nilfgaard was also hunting her. The Lodge of Sorceresses was looking for her. Various factions and forces all wanted to claim the princess with elder blood. The hunt had to be careful, had to wait for the moment when Ciri was vulnerable enough to take, but not so protected that the attempt would fail. He nearly caught her twice. Once in Broccolon Forest, but the Dryad's magic interfered with the hunt's ability to manifest fully in our reality. And again, on the road to Sodden, but Geralt appeared, and the hunt withdrew rather than face a witcher who might recognize them for what they were. So they waited. They watched as Ciri trained at Kaer Morhen, as she grew stronger and more skilled. They watched as her power awakened, as the elder blood began to manifest. And they planned, schemed, prepared for the moment when they would make their move. That moment came during Ciri's second year at Kaer Morhen. She was 14 now, no longer a child, but not yet a woman. Her training with both Geralt and Yennefer had progressed remarkably. She was deadly with a sword. She could track and hunt. She understood herbs and potions, and while she still could not cast traditional spells, she had learned to sense her elder blood power and exert some control over it. It was spring, and Ciri had been sent into the forest on a solo training exercise. She was to track a deer, observe it without being detected, and return with a description of its behavior. It was meant to be a simple test of her wilderness skills. Ciri was deep in the forest following deer tracks through the underbrush when the sky suddenly darkened. Storm clouds appeared from nowhere, rolling in faster than any natural weather pattern. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost began to form on the leaves, though it was spring and far too warm for frost. Ciri felt it immediately. The elder blood within her responded to the presence of something else, something powerful and ancient. Her skin prickled with warning. She drew her sword and turned in a slow circle, searching for the threat she knew was coming. Then she heard them. The sound of hooves, but not on the ground, in the sky. The sound of metal armor clinking, of weapons being drawn, of breathing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The wild hunt appeared, materializing out of the storm clouds like nightmares given form. They were spectral, translucent, not fully present in this reality, but present enough. Eredin rode at their head, his armor gleaming like ice, his face terrible and beautiful. "Cyrilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon," Eredin said, his voice echoing strangely, as if coming from a great distance. "Princess of Sintra, carrier of elder blood, you have been found. You will come with us." Eredin laughed, cold and empty. "You misunderstand, child. This is not a request. We have hunted you since your birth. We have waited with patience that you cannot comprehend. The time for waiting is over. You belong to us now." The riders spread out, encircling her. They began to close in, moving with the coordination of a hunting pack. Ciri raised her sword, knowing it was useless against these spectral figures, but refusing to give up without a fight. And then something inside her responded. The elder blood, feeling the threat, feeling the presence of these beings who shared ancient origins with Lara Dorren, surged to life. Ciri's eyes widened as power flooded through her, more power than she had ever felt before. She did not scream this time. Instead, she simply reached out with her mind, with her will, with the blood that connected her to something vast and terrible, and she pushed. Reality bent around her. The air seemed to crack like glass. The Wild Hunt riders were thrown backward, their spectral forms destabilizing, flickering like candles in a strong wind. Eredin himself was forced to take several steps back, his expression one of shock and something that might have been pleasure. But before the hunt could regroup and attack again, Ciri felt something else, a pulling sensation as if the world was trying to drag her somewhere. The elder blood, activated and wild, was responding to her desperate need to escape by doing what it did naturally. It was opening a portal. Ciri had never intentionally opened a portal before. She did not know how to control this. But in that moment, with the Wild Hunt closing in, with death or capture imminent, she did not care. She let the power take her. The world seemed to fold in on itself. Colors inverted. Sounds became distant and echoing. And then Ciri was falling, tumbling through something that was not space, through somewhere that was not a place, through a gap between realities. She landed hard on stone, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. When she could breathe again, when she could see again, she found herself somewhere else. Not in the forest, not in her world at all. She was in a city, but not a human city. The buildings were too tall, too elegant, built of materials that seemed to glow with inner light. The sky was the wrong color, a pale green she had never seen before. Strange plants grew from every surface, vines with silver leaves and flowers that chimed like bells in the wind. But she did not know where she was. She did not know how to get back. And as she stood there, alone and terrified in an alien world, she realized the true scope of her power and the terrible burden it represented. And the Wild Hunt could follow her. They had their own ways of crossing dimensions. Wherever she ran, they could pursue. She was not safe. She would never be safe, not until she learned to truly master her power, or until she found a way to face the hunt directly and end their pursuit once and for all. Ciri spent 3 days in that strange world before she managed to jump back, landing in a meadow several miles from Kaer Morhen. She was exhausted, hungry, terrified by what had happened. When she finally made it back to the fortress, Geralt and Yennefer were frantic. They had searched for her, following her tracks to the spot in the forest where the hunt had appeared. They had seen the signs of the confrontation, the frozen ground, the disturbed air, the sense of wrongness that lingered even after the hunt withdrew. Ciri told them everything. About Eredin and the riders. About the power that had surged through her. About jumping to another world and barely finding her way back. Yennefer's face went pale as Ciri described it. You jumped dimensions without training, without preparation. You could have been lost forever, scattered across realities, or landed somewhere that would kill you instantly. You were incredibly fortunate. I know, Yennefer said, her voice softer now. She pulled Ciri into an embrace. I know. But this changes things. The hunt knows where you are now. They know how powerful you are. They will come again, and next time they will be prepared for your defenses. Geralt and Yennefer exchanged a long look. Finally, Geralt spoke. You learn to control your power completely. You become strong enough that the hunt cannot take you even if they try. And if they do try again, you make them regret it. From that day forward, Ciri's training intensified. Yennefer worked with her every day on understanding her elder blood abilities. Geralt pushed her harder in combat training. They taught her everything they knew about the hunt, about dimension travel, about the white frost that was coming for all worlds eventually. Ciri learned that she was not just running from the hunt. She was running from a destiny that said she would one day have to face the white frost itself, to stand between all of reality and the consuming cold, to make a choice that would echo through all the worlds and all of time. It was a heavy burden for a young girl to carry. Some nights, Ciri would sit on the walls of Kaer Morhen and look up at the stars, wondering which of them might be other worlds, other realities, wondering if somewhere out there was a version of herself who did not carry this terrible power, who lived a simple, normal life. But then she would think of Geralt and Yennefer, of the witches who had become her family. She would think of her grandmother's final words telling her to be strong, to be brave, and she would steel herself for what was to come. But Ciri would be ready. She would train, she would learn, she would grow strong. And when the time came to face her destiny, she would face it on her own terms, not as a victim or a tool, but as herself. The fire burns low here in our library, my dear friends, and I see the concern on your faces. This has been a dark chapter, full of danger and frightening revelations. The wild hunt is a terrible enemy, and Ciri's burden is almost too heavy to contemplate. But take heart. Tomorrow, I will tell you of what came next, of Ciri's time between worlds, of her growth and her struggles, of how she learned to use her power and began to understand her true destiny. Sleep well, my young scholars, and do not let tonight's tales give you nightmares. Remember that even in the face of such dangers, Ciri never gave up. She kept fighting, kept learning, kept moving forward. Until tomorrow evening, then, may your dreams be peaceful and your courage strong. Good evening once more, my dear friends. I see you have returned eager to hear the continuation of our tale. The fire crackles warmly tonight, and I have prepared hot cider with spices to ward off the chill. Pour yourselves a cup. Make yourselves comfortable, and let me tell you of Ciri's darkest hours, and of the strange allies she found in the most unexpected places. The years passed at Kaer Morhen, and Ciri grew from a frightened girl into a formidable young woman. She was 17 now, skilled with blade and bow, knowledgeable in herbs and tracking, able to sense and partially control her elder blood abilities, but control was still imperfect, still uncertain. The power within her was like a wild horse, sometimes cooperative, sometimes bucking against any attempt at guidance. Yennefer had done everything she could, but she admitted freely that Ciri's power was beyond her expertise. The elder blood operated on principles that normal magic simply did not follow. It was primal, instinctive, connected to forces that predated the conjunction of the spheres, and the dreams were getting worse. Every night, Ciri saw the Wild Hunt riding through storm clouds. She saw Eredin's cold face, heard his voice calling her name. She saw worlds freezing, dying, consumed by the white frost. She woke gasping, covered in sweat, the taste of fear bitter in her mouth. The hunt had not returned to Kaer Morhen, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. They were waiting, watching, planning their next move, and when they came again, they would not make the same mistakes. They would be prepared for Ciri's power, ready to counter it or contain it. Geralt wanted Ciri to stay at Kaer Morhen, where she was relatively safe. But Ciri was restless, feeling trapped by the mountain fortress that had been her home and prison for years. She wanted to see the world, to live, to be something more than just a vessel for ancient prophecy. "I cannot stay here forever," she told Geralt one evening as they sat by the fire. "I am 17 years old. Most girls my age are married, running households, living their lives. I am hiding in a fortress, waiting for monsters from another world to come claim me." "You are not most girls," Geralt replied, his voice gentle but firm. "The moment you leave this place, you will be in danger. Not just from the hunt, but from everyone who knows what you are and what you can do. Then I will face that danger," Ciri said, with the stubborn determination that reminded Geralt so much of Calanthe. "I can't live my whole life in fear. Grandmother would not have wanted that." Geralt looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the child he had claimed through the law of surprise, but a woman who had earned the right to make her own choices. "Then I will not stop you," he said finally. "But please, Ciri, be careful. And if you need me, if you are in trouble, send word. I will come for you no matter where you are or what danger stands between us." So Ciri left Kaer Morhen. She traveled south, wearing simple clothes, her ash-colored hair hidden beneath a hood. She carried her sword on her back and a small purse of coins that Yennefer had given her. She was going to see the world, to experience life beyond the fortress walls. For a few weeks, it was wonderful. She traveled through villages and towns, saw festivals and markets, spoke with people who had no idea who she was. She was just another young traveler, anonymous and free. She helped farmers with their harvests, earning meals and a place to sleep. She practiced her sword skills with local guards who were impressed by her technique. She felt alive in a way she had not felt in years. The hunt found her in a small town called Cliswin. She had been there for 3 days, helping at the local inn in exchange for room and board. She was serving drinks in the common room when she felt it. The cold, the sense of wrongness, the prickling of her skin that meant the hunt was near. She dropped the tray she was holding and ran out the back door into the streets, not even stopping to grab her belongings. She could hear the panic starting behind her as the temperature plummeted, as frost spread across the windows, as people realized something terrible was happening. The hunt appeared, materializing in the town square. This time, they were more solid, more present than before. They had found a way to manifest more fully in this reality. Eredin sat on his spectral horse, surrounded by a dozen of his red riders, and his eyes locked onto Ciri with absolute certainty. "There is nowhere you can run, child of elder blood," he called out, his voice carrying over the screaming of terrified townspeople. "Surrender now, and you will not be harmed. Resist, and we will take you by force, and these people will suffer for your defiance." Ciri stood in the center of the square, her hand on her sword hilt, weighing her options. She could fight, but there were too many of them, and they were prepared this time. She could try to jump between worlds again, but she still had little control over where she would land. She might end up somewhere even more dangerous, and Eredin had threatened the townspeople. Innocent people who had shown her kindness, who had no part in this cosmic drama. If she fought here, if she resisted, they would die. The hunt would kill them out of spite or simply because they were in the way. It was a trap. Ciri knew it was a trap. But she could not let innocent people die because of her. She had been raised by Calanthe to protect those who could not protect themselves. She had been trained by Geralt to stand against evil, even when the odds were impossible. She could not abandon these principles now, even to save herself. Eredin considered this, then nodded. "Very well. You have 1 hour to clear the town. Then you come with us, or we burn this place to the ground, with everyone in it." The evacuation was chaos. Ciri helped where she could, directing people to gather their families, to take what they could carry and run. The townspeople did not understand what was happening, only that something terrible had arrived, and they needed to flee. They ran into the surrounding countryside, carrying children and elderly, abandoning their homes and their lives. When the hour was up, when the last family had fled beyond the edge of town, Ciri stood alone in the empty square. The hunt surrounded her, Eredin at their head. He extended his hand, and Ciri saw then what they intended. They were going to take her through a portal back to their world, to Tir Nalia. Once there, she would be completely at their mercy, unable to escape, unable to resist. But she had one last card to play. As Eredin's hand came toward her, as she felt the portal beginning to open, Ciri reached deep inside herself, down to where the elder blood burned like a star in her core. She grabbed that power, pulled it to the surface, and screamed. It was not the uncontrolled scream of her childhood. This was focused, directed, everything she had learned from Yennefer about emotional control and intent, channeled into a single moment of pure force. The world shattered around her. The portal Eredin was opening exploded, the energy scattering in all directions. The hunt riders were thrown backward, their spectral forms destabilizing, and Ciri, At the center of it all felt reality bend to her will. She jumped, but this time she tried to control it, to aim for somewhere specific rather than letting the power take her randomly. She thought of safety, of sanctuary, of places the hunt could not easily follow. The world dissolved around her. She fell through the spaces between realities, tumbling through the void. And when she landed gasping and exhausted, she found herself somewhere completely unexpected. She was on a beach, but the sand was the wrong color, a deep purple that sparkled in the light. The ocean was not water, but something thicker, oily, that moved in slow waves. The sky above was the color of old copper, with 3 moons visible even though it seemed to be daytime. Ciri had jumped to another world. Not just another place in her own reality, but a completely different dimension, a completely different sphere of existence. She lay on the purple sand, trying to catch her breath, trying to understand what had just happened. She had controlled the jump, at least partially. She had escaped the hunt, but she had also stranded herself in a world she did not know, with no clear way to return home. This was the beginning of Ciri's time between worlds. For the next several months, measured by her own internal sense of time, since days and nights varied wildly between dimensions, she jumped from world to world, sometimes intentionally trying to find her way home, sometimes accidentally when the hunt found her again and she had to flee. She saw wonders and horrors that no one from her world could imagine. She visited a world where the entire surface was covered in crystal forests that sang in harmonies no human composer could match. She visited a world of endless desert, where the sand was made of ground glass and the heat was so intense that metal melted in seconds. She visited a world of endless ocean where massive creatures the size of mountains swam beneath the surface. Some worlds were populated. She met beings that were not human, not elf, not anything she had a name for. Some were friendly, offering her food and shelter. Others were hostile, attacking on sight. She learned to be cautious, to assess each new world quickly, to be ready to jump again at the first sign of danger. But jumping took energy, took something fundamental from her. Each time she used her power to cross dimensions, she felt a little more drained, a little more diminished. The elder blood was powerful, but it was not infinite. She could exhaust it, burn it out, and then she would be stranded wherever she happened to be, unable to move, unable to return home. She needed to learn to use her power more efficiently. She needed to understand the mechanics of dimension travel, not just rely on instinct and desperation. They were not like the unicorns from stories and legends. They were something far older, far more powerful. They appeared as horses with spiral horns, yes, but their bodies seemed to shift and shimmer, as if they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their eyes held intelligence that was vast and ancient, and when they looked at Ciri, she felt they could see not just her, but all possible versions of her across all possible timelines. The unicorns communicated not with words, but with impressions, feelings, concepts that appeared directly in Ciri's mind. They told her that they had been watching her journey. They told her that they were enemies of the Wild Hunt, had been fighting against Eridan and his kind for longer than human civilization had existed. The Hunt and the Unicorns were ancient adversaries. The NL had once tried to conquer the Unicorn worlds, to enslave these beings and use their power. The Unicorns had fought back, had driven the Hunt away, and had been opposing them ever since across multiple dimensions. The Unicorns saw in Ciri a potential ally. She carried the Elder Blood, the same power that the Hunt sought to control. But unlike the Hunt, Ciri was not cruel, not motivated by conquest and domination. She was simply trying to survive, to find her way home, to live her own life. They offered to teach her, to show her how to use her power more efficiently, more safely, to help her understand the mechanics of jumping between worlds so that she would not exhaust herself or land somewhere that would kill her instantly. Ciri accepted gratefully. For weeks, she trained with the Unicorns in their Twilight world. They taught her to sense the boundaries between dimensions, to find the thin places where crossing was easier. They taught her to aim her jumps, to visualize where she wanted to go, and let the power take her there rather than flinging her randomly across the multiverse. They also warned her about the White Frost. The Unicorns knew about it, had been fleeing from it themselves for eons. They told her that it was getting closer to her home world, that in a few generations, perhaps less, it would reach the sphere where she was born and begin its slow consumption of that reality. You are the one who might stop it, they told her, the concepts appearing in her mind with crystal clarity. Or at least the one who might save others from it. The prophecy speaks truth. You hold the fate of worlds in your hands. But I don't want that responsibility, Ciri said aloud, though she knew they could hear her thoughts. I just want to go home. I want to be with Geralt and Yennefer. I want to live my life. That's the end of our story for today. We'll continue in the next episode. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you.